Hello everybody, welcome to Movies by McManus, the channel where we break down movies, comics, TV, books, whatever kind of media you're into, in the context of who created it and what effect it's trying to have on the world. And today we're going to be breaking down the 2007 book Havana Nocturne, written by T.J. English. Now, this is the third T.J. English book that we've done on this channel, but since he is my favorite author, I love revisiting his work, and every time I do, I always find something new to say about them. Havana Nocturne follows the Mafia's involvement building casinos in Havana, Cuba, in the late 40s and into the 50s, and really shows how, during this time, Havana was controlled as almost a city-state for the American Mafia. It also deals with the rise of communist forces led by Fidel Castro, and explains why, during this time, the people of Cuba would rather support a communist dictator than their current government. The story starts in 1946, with a meeting of all the heads of the Mafia families from all across America, known as the Havana Conference. Now, the Havana Conference has been depicted in several movies throughout the years, most notably in The Godfather Part 2, though in The Godfather, a lot of the details are changed. For years, the American Mafia had wanted to create a city that was completely controlled by them, where they wouldn't have any interference from law enforcement, and they could basically do whatever they wanted and get away with it. At first, this city was going to be Las Vegas. Vegas at the time was a small town in the middle of the Nevada desert, in a state where gambling was already legal. It seemed like the ideal spot for the American Mafia to set up shop without the federal government getting into all their business. While today Las Vegas is a major American city, in 1946, with no existing infrastructure or metropolitan area, the only source for customers for the mob's casinos were people who were willing to drive from Los Angeles into the Nevada desert. And because of this, the Mafia was bleeding money. The Mafia needed to find a new city. In come two gangsters, Meyer Lansky and Santo Trafficante, with Meyer Lansky being the boss of the Jewish mob in New York, and the Trafficante crime family being the main Mafia presence in Florida. The two gangsters had relations with Havana, Cuba, dating back to Prohibition. So Lansky and Trafficante decided that Havana was going to be the new Las Vegas, though both Santo and Meyer claimed that they had the idea first. The two gangsters invited criminals from all across America to meet in Havana and decide how they were going to carve up the city and Cuba as a whole. Since Havana wasn't an American city, and the Cuban government were not only willing to let gangsters come into their country, but became willing partners with them, Havana had the potential to be a safe haven for not just American gangsters, but gangsters all over the world. The move from Las Vegas to Havana was finally cemented in 1947, with the man in charge of the Mafia's interests in Las Vegas, Bugsy Siegel, being gunned down in his mansion in Beverly Hills. Now, if you're wondering why the Cuban people would be okay with a bunch of American gangsters coming into their capital city and using it as their own personal playground, the short answer is they weren't. During this time, Cuba was run by a military dictator, Fulgencio Batista. In 1933, Batista took over the Cuban government in a military coup. And throughout his regime, he became more and more of a tyrant, throwing out the Cuban Constitution and Bill of Rights, which guaranteed the Cuban people a lot of the same rights that we have here in America. The Cuban people's right to free speech and other basic rights were dismantled. And for many Cuban people who already saw Batista as an illegitimate leader, allowing American gangsters to run amok in the capital city was the last straw. One of these Cubans was a young lawyer named Fidel Castro. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruiz was one of the most vocal critics of the Batista regime. It's also important to note that at this time, Fidel Castro was not yet a communist, but instead advocated for a constitutional democracy in Cuba. In 1955, after a failed rebellion, Castro is forced to leave Cuba and ends up living in Mexico City. There, he meets another exiled revolutionary named Che Guevara. And it's at this point that Castro begins to embrace the idea of communism. 1 year later, Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and a small army of Cuban exiles sneak back into the country and begin a guerrilla war against the Batista regime. Now, back to the gangsters. By 1957, things start to take a turn in Havana. While all the American Mafia bosses are making money with their Havana casinos, they start to worry that they may have given too much power to Meyer Lansky. After the murder of Albert Anastasia, who owned a large piece of Havana's casinos, Meyer Lansky now controlled the majority of the city, making him not only one of the most powerful gangsters in America, but one of the most powerful gangsters in the world. Lansky, who was Jewish, was not trusted by many of the Italian mafia bosses, and they started to regret giving him so much power. To turn up the pressure even more, there's an assassination attempt against Lansky's main ally in the New York underworld, boss Frank Costello. Costello survives the assassination attempt, but relinquishes his power to another gangster, Vito Genovese, who hated Meyer Lansky. Lansky was now feeling himself being forced out of Cuba, and to make matters worse, the country now started to support the guerrilla army led by Fidel Castro. And Fulgencio Batista's time in Cuba may have been coming to an end. With the tide of war turning towards Fidel Castro, many American gangsters also switched their support, even supplying Fidel with weapons during the war, believing that if they helped him overthrow the Cuban government, he would allow them to keep their Havana casinos. Castro did not return the favor, instead vowing that he would kick the mob out of Cuba for good. On New Year's Eve, 1948, seeing that the war was lost, Fulgencio Batista and a few other Cuban officials had fled the country. And on January 6, 1959, Fidel and his army finally invade Havana, making sure to trash every mob casino that they could find. Meyer Lansky and the rest of the mafia bosses flee Havana as well, leaving millions of dollars in assets behind them. Gangster Santo Trafficante is captured and imprisoned by Fidel, before he's eventually allowed to leave back to America. But the constitutional democracy never came. Before the revolution, not many Cuban people knew about Fidel Castro's communist beliefs, and it's possible that they would have never supported him if they did. Fidel Castro, once he took power, didn't let go until 2008. As for the Mafia, they never recovered their losses. Meyer Lansky tried setting up casinos in the Bahamas and other Caribbean islands, but he never found the same success. And the city of Las Vegas, by this point, was finally turning a profit. So it seems like the gangsters who never switched their interests from Las Vegas to Havana came out on top in the end. The American government first tried to make an alliance with the new Castro regime, but Fidel Castro made it clear that he would not allow American companies to do business in Cuba. And so, the CIA teamed up with the Mafia to to try to assassinate Castro in what's known as Operation Mongoose. But that may be a topic for a different video. So, besides being an interesting story, what's TJ English trying to tell us with this book? Well, the message seems pretty clear. Don't do business with gangsters. It seems like it would be a no-brainer, but time and time again, people keep convincing themselves that it's a good idea. But on a more serious note, if we look at the book Where the Bodies Were Buried, TJ English speaks a lot about government accountability. Basically, if a government is willing to do immoral things and go against its people's interests, it shouldn't be surprised when those people turn against them. In Cuba, the Batista regime was so brutal and so corrupt that the people were willing to side with someone like Fidel Castro in order to get rid of them. And if we look at our own country, here in America, people were so sick of politics as usual that they were willing to elect a lunatic like Donald Trump into office. But that may also be a topic for a different video. Instead, I'll leave you with this. In Where the Bodies Were Buried, defense lawyer for Whitey Bulger says the line, "The government is not them, the government is us." At what point as people do we say enough is enough? If a government is so corrupt that they strip away rights and make deals with criminals, then whatever happens next shouldn't really surprise them. But regardless of all that, this is an amazing book, and it makes you really wish you were in Havana in the 50s, hanging out on the beach, having a cocktail, and maybe losing some money to the Mafia. So, if you like TJ English, you're a fan of Cuban history and like the rise of Fidel Castro, then I would check it out. And if you like this video, subscribe to our channel, check out our podcast, and follow us on social media at Movies by McManus. I'm your host, Greg. Have a good night.